This talk is hosted by the Agile Business Consortium in connection with the Agile20Reflect Festival. And today we have Vikram Jain from JCURV. He's the Managing Director from JCURV, and he's going to be doing a session for us on Exco-led Agile transformation. So thank you so much, Vikram, for joining us this afternoon and doing this session. Just to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we start, if that's okay by everyone. So if I could ask you all to keep yourselves on mute during the session, that would be really helpful. Also, just to let you all know that we are recording this session for the benefit of you guys to be able to watch this afterwards, which will be available both on the Agile20Reflect website, but also will be available on our Agile Business Consortium website, so we can make that available to you afterwards. Also, if I could ask that if you have any questions for Vikram throughout his presentation, if you're able to note them in the chat, both myself and Jade from the consortium will be able to keep a note of them, and then we've got some time at the end to go through them with Vikram, and he can address all of those questions for you at the end of the presentation. And also Jade and myself will just be sending a small link in the chat at the end just to gain some of your feedback. So just to ask you guys how you felt about this chat and how we can improve moving forward, because we have some other sessions lined up for you during the festival. So without further ado, enough from me. I'll pass over to Vikram. Thank you very much, Vikram.
All right. So firstly, thanks so much for taking the time out of your really busy weeks to come and kind of participate in this discussion. What I'll do is I'll introduce myself in a second, but I guess the focus of this discussion today is really around how do you go. I mean, we just want to share some experiences of what we've done in the past in terms of leading Exco-led transformations. And the critical thing is how do we best get leaders to own and role model the best behaviors, which will really enable the organization to both deliver value, but also sustain agile ways of working. Now, obviously, you know, in context of the manifesto's birthday, what we see is that obviously every organization is very different, and thus you can't treat every organization the same. And ultimately, just to kind of be a little bit contrarian, you can't hit everyone with the same manifesto stick. Yeah, and I guess what I'm going to be talking about today is that, you know, every organization you have to be very considered around, and what we've found anyway is most successful is kind of heavily tailoring the manifesto or a version of the manifesto for each organization. And by doing that, obviously, you know, you're going to get a lot more ownership, a lot more buy-in, and it's going to be a lot more relevant for the specific organization in its specific context. Okay, so that's what I'm going to be walking you through now. I'm going to probably speak for about 20 minutes, something like that. And then, you know, it'd be great, you know, it's just relatively small group, so we can have a discussion, have some chat. Maybe I'd love to get your feedback on this, but also kind of hear everyone else's experiences as well. Is that okay with everyone? Brilliant. So just a quick introduction of who we are then. I run a consultancy called JCurve. We're about 20 people, and our mission is to help increase the agility of organizations so they can thrive in an uncertain world. We've worked with quite a large number of organisations in the last kind of 6 years, where we've kind of helped unlock over £2 billion worth of value. And value for us is that they actually can extract, you know, revenues, profit, you know, reduce costs much faster than they would have done before. You know, and we do a lot of research and we do a lot of kind of points of view. Recently, we've just done a joint piece of research with the Agile Business Consortium on looking at the state of Agile culture. Last year, and we're running a session in a couple of weeks' time actually to kind of follow up on a second follow-up on that as well. So when we're thinking about doing a kind of an agile transformation, we always start with, you know, what makes things successful, where are the challenges, and ultimately, you know, hopefully you've kind of seen this before. You know, it's always the same challenges which come to the top. Why do agile transformations fail or succeed? Is because of company culture. This is a piece of research, if you haven't seen it before, by version 1. They do a survey every year, and what they found is that, you know, the top reasons of why agile transformations fail: company culture, organizational resistance, inadequate management support. Roughly those topics and themes come up every year, over and above training, processes, and interestingly, technology is not even there. Okay, and this piece of research I just mentioned we did with the Agile Business Consortium, what we found there is that there is a strong correlation between culture and our culture score, and we've got a diagnostic which looks at kind of how strong a culture is in an organization aligned around Agile. We found that there's a correlation between, if it scores high on culture, you've got on average, an organization will outperform it by about 235%. So it's hugely important to get that right. And I guess why am I saying this is because that ultimately, when we start thinking about implementing and embedding an Agile approach, it's not about just the teams iterating and doing all the great things that I know a lot of us do, coaching the teams, Scrum mastering the teams and supporting them. Ultimately, it's all about creating a safe environment for those teams to really operate in. And I'm sure we've all got plenty of examples of where we've seen very successful teams get crushed quite quickly if the leadership team aren't aligned in their behaviors, in their mindsets to make that work. So that's kind of where we start, is really just saying, well, the leaders have got to role model this way of working and really got to create the safe environment for them to operate in. And to my point earlier, so we can't typically, we could introduce the Agile manifesto and kind of say, this is what we want to do, and the leaders have got to follow that. But we know that every single organization is very different. Everyone's got different interests, different strengths, different weaknesses. So from our perspective, it does require a little bit of tailoring on how these leaders go on that journey. And that's what I'm going to just kind of share with, how do we get those leaders to buy in to that way of working, and most importantly, start role modeling those ways of working as well. Okay, so, I guess we've got two options. One is the old tell approach, where we could throw the rule book at the leadership team or any of the individuals, whether it's a function, whether it's the team itself. And, and obviously, with respect to the manifesto, we could throw the manifesto at them and saying, look, here's the 12 elements of the manifesto. Where are you? Do a diagnostic. And, this is where you are, and this is what you need to be doing differently. And I know I'm just being a little bit extreme here, but we do see organizations do that. I'm just using the manifesto as a way of kind of holding individuals, leaders to account. Okay. Our approach, and based on success, I guess, and based on experience, is to say that you've got to co-create, discover and co-create this manifesto and tailor it for the organization as well. Okay, so, and what you'll see in the future, in a couple of slides' time, is that maybe it'll be looking very, very different to that for that particular organization, because it's relevant to them, not necessarily relevant just for being Agile's sake. So how do we go about doing that then? So with a lot of our clients, whether it's large PLCs, whether it's companies of a couple of hundred people, the way we recommend, or the way we've found it really work in terms of co-creating a set of principles, is the one we often take leaders to go and see other organizations. Clearly it's a little bit different now, because we can't all go and visit anything at the moment, but we've just recently took an insurance leadership team to go and meet a retail banking leadership team, and actually go and see and go and experience kind of how other organizations have approached it. And I guess that really helps the leaders absorb and almost disprove some of their mental model in terms of what they think is possible or not. And most importantly, help them start unlearning what's made them successful in the past is perhaps not what's going to make them successful in the future as well. So speaking to their peers, seeing their peers in action really has a big impact in saying, okay, well, what could I do differently? The second piece is we do a lot of simulation events and things like that. So again, rather than just kind of throwing the rule back at them and saying, like, the manifesto, this is what you should be doing, is we get teams to experience Agile ways of working, so they can have a first-hand experience in terms of, okay, what does that really mean for me? Based on my experience, how could I apply that into my job? Hopefully hands-on experience as well. And obviously, back in the olden days, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot, we do a lot of Lego simulations. Now we're doing the whole thing equivalent, but using Mural to build cities and things like that. But we're getting the same learnings from a lot of our clients in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and what they can take away into their organizations as well. The other piece, naturally, is we've got to help those leaders go on a learning journey as well. So we do teach them the basics of Agile in terms of its concepts, 2. And after doing all of this stuff, and usually this can take a few months, because to try and organize a bunch of leaders to go and visit various different organizations, speak to some peers, run an experiential session, usually takes a few weeks if you can line it up. But ultimately, at the end of all of this, we run a retrospective, and what we ask is simply a simple question, which is, what do we need to do as an organization or as a leadership team to deliver value faster, more efficiently, more effectively, whilst reducing risk? Now, through all of those learnings and experiences they've got, they can then start putting it into the context of their own organization, rather than being dependent on the manifesto or the rule book itself. Okay, so that's kind of our experience of how we go about defining a set of, or getting the leaders to go on their journey and start thinking about what does that mean for me, rather than just depending on an external, I guess a set of rules. Okay, and obviously, in our learning sessions, we do obviously introduce the manifesto and we do introduce the concepts. But I guess what I'm saying on this session is that we can't just use that and depend on that. It has to be relevant to that particular organization with its own specificities. So what does it look like then as a result? So ultimately, the focus is about agility, not agile. And that's what we're really trying to get with this organization, and that's what we're asking that question: what's it going to take for us to go faster, be more efficient, be more effective? It's not for us to be more agile in terms of, so we can tick the maturity boxes and get 5 out of 5 on all the scores. This is all about how do we deliver value faster in the most efficient and low risk way. So what does that look like then? So here's an example from, we worked with a large supermarket chain, Sainsburys, in the UK. And this is what we developed with their kind of 12, there's basically Exco members and their kind of transformational leaders, let's just say. And so, again, they went on that journey. They went to actually visit a couple of companies. We did the experiential elements as well and the teaching elements. And basically, as a result of that, they kind of did their retrospective and said, here's what our strengths are. Here's what our weaknesses are. As a result of that, these are the things that we believe are going to help us specifically go faster, be more efficient, be more effective. Okay. So what we did is in all our clients, we basically define a set of principles. So you see the principles on the left, these kind of very big, bold statements: dare to dream, deliver value early and often, etc. On the right-hand side, we have a set of behaviors. Now, these behaviors we write as we or I statements. The reason why we do that is simply because we can then measure, because you can observe a behavior, and thus then we can be better, or the client themselves can then better score how they're doing against it and observe how they're doing against those behaviors as well. And I'll kind of explain the reason why in a second. So with this particular client, the reason why they came up with some of these, just to bring this to life a little bit, the first principle, for example, was daring to dream. Sainsburys, like most kind of old traditional retailers, probably we're in a space where it's very, very much focused on short-term cost management, and essentially dealing with the fact that Aldi and Lidl have just come from nowhere and taking a lot of market share, Amazon, etc., huge threats on the kind of a digital side as well. And ultimately they ended up being very short-term focused and very much focused on what's going to happen next week. In a week, Sainsburys may have adjusted their prices on their groceries. Amazon were launching their first ever drone delivery, etc. So their first principle was, let's really start daring to dream and be ambitious, and that will really allow us to properly stretch our legs. But beyond that, the behaviors are around how do we want to empower our teams to challenge the status quo, want to set challenging targets. The other thing really interesting was this deliver value early and often. They recognized that it could take up to 2 years just to even approve a new bread ingredients in the products, believe it or not. So they were having discussions for 2 years about whether they should bake from frozen or bake from fresh in their supermarkets, because they were constantly focusing on getting things absolutely perfect, absolutely right, and they were scared of putting something in front of the customer which they may potentially be perceived as being not as good quality as they thought they wanted to be. So again, this whole principle of delivering value early often, and again, you can see the behaviors in that. We set time box goals, we prioritize continually, etc. Action before perfection was another one. They're really proud supermarket. Obviously, they wanted to get everything absolutely spot on in front of the customer. But when we went through the experience, the Agile experiences we did with Lego and went to go and see a few other clients, what they found is that a lot of clients are happier to kind of put something which is not perfect in front of the customer, and they valued the insights of the feedback over actual getting pounds and pence of money right in right now. So again, they developed a kind of a principle around action before perfection with a supporting set of behaviours as well. And what was really good is that, you know, so okay, we can compare that against the Agile manifesto. Of course, it's not fully holistic, but the most important thing, and this is what we've seen time and time again with leadership teams especially, one, it's the leadership team which has defined them. So you're going to have a lot easier time of getting them to role model a set of behaviours they've defined themselves, rather than following a rules book which someone's given to them. And you know, it's like you're more going to follow something which you've co-created or created yourself, rather than just being told what to do. And the second thing is because they've developed these, they're really excited about them. And obviously, you know, what we do is we get them to almost commit to role modeling these as quickly as possible as soon as we finish these sessions. So that makes, again, going back to my point at the start, this is what starts creating a safe environment for others to operate in as well. Okay, so that's just an example of the principal behaviours that we've developed. Again, they're not like for like with the manifesto, but they're really relevant for this particular organisation. And I think that's the most important thing, really respecting their strengths and their weaknesses and talking their language. If you notice, there's not much discussion around Agile, actually, but they've made it their own. And I think that's the really important thing here. I'm not going to go through another example in huge amounts of detail. This is one for a bank. And interestingly, you know, if you have a look at principle number 5, putting the customer in the room, of course, you know, the manifesto starts with, you know, everything starts with the customer, okay? They very much recognize that the customer wasn't there, and thus they developed a set of kind of specifics around how we're going to behave in terms of using the customer as part of driving their decision making, etc. as well. Okay, now how do we bring all this to life? So once we've developed the principles and behaviors, obviously there's an expectation that we use this as part of our retrospectives at team level, but also at leadership team level as well. So if we've got a portfolio management team, you know, whether it's chief product owners, your product managers, etc., you know, at the top there, they're obviously reviewing on a monthly basis how they're performing against those behaviors. And they can self-score, and that's important. We also get the delivery teams to do the same thing. So that gives us a nice kind of 180-degree view on, and what we're not doing here is we're blaming each other, saying, okay, well, I'd score the leadership team 3 out of 5 and we're at 5 out of 5. This is all about holding the organization to account to say, how are we doing as an organization about, you know, daring to dream? How are we doing in terms of delivering value early and often? And that's the really important part. So it's fully objective, independent, and we're holding the organization to account over any specific individual. And this is how it kind of manifests. So, you know, again, let's just take the Sainsburys example. So we had our behaviors and principles, and basically I've just kind of broken down an excerpt from kind of, you know, a few months over a particular year. And what we did, very simply, we get the teams, in this case, the leadership team, to score how they're doing against the behaviors. And obviously you can see a variation. And naturally, I think they're very confident, let's just say, kind of early on, and then reality starts to strike. But it's really interesting what happens. So what we do every 30 days, at the end of the, let's just say the end of the 30 days, we do run a retrospective at a portfolio level. And with the leadership team there, we ask, how's it going? They score themselves. Let's just say in this case, you know, in the first month, they said, well, actually, we're doing pretty well on many of these areas. We're role modeling these things. The team's already starting to deliver value, great. But, you know, one thing we're scoring ourselves lowers on is we're just still doing too much, and the teams are screaming that we've just pushed too much onto their plates. So, you know, we're scoring 2 out of 5, sorry, on effectively prioritization. Yeah. And so what we did is that we create a 30-day behavioral sprint. And what we do in that case is, okay, what are we going to do? We ask the leadership team, if you see that as the biggest gap as a team, and that's the theme there, now, what are we going to do in the next 30 days to experiment with stopping work? And so that was the thing. The action was, in the next 30 days, we're going to try and really up the volume on prioritization and stop as much low-value work as possible, and let's see how we do on that side. And naturally, there's a lot of challenges around, leaders doing that because they want everything's a priority, and getting them to kind of even just cut a few things out is super important. And then hopefully, because it's an experiment, within a few days, in this case 30 days, we get to the end of it. How was that? Well, I stopped the things. It's okay. It's quite acceptable that we didn't really need those anyway, and the lights are still on, etc. The next one, interestingly, in March came up, that I've just realized that, I'm now getting into this kind of empowerment piece. I've just realized that, watch the David Marquette video for the third time. I've just realized that I'm really not delegating very well. And I'm going to now experiment with kind of delegation. I'm going to experiment with kind of like empowering the team more. And because it's an experiment, it's safe. Within 30 days, hopefully nothing can go significantly wrong. And let's see. And what's nice is when we do the retrospective the next month, we found that the leaders are actually being pleasantly surprised by how much the teams have picked up and done things which they never thought they would do. Okay, you can get the gist. So, as we go along, in kind of in April time, the daring to dream thing was really interesting, is that, in the third month, the team started to identify that a lot of low-hanging fruit had been taken away. All their good ideas had gone, and suddenly they kind of ran out of big ideas, and they're like, okay, well, we need to really start running some creative thinking sessions. And that's a skill that we just never had before, because we've never really had to exercise that muscle. So what are we going to do? Again, within 30 days, we started experimenting. And it's that nice continuous improvement approach, which really starts to embed these agile ways of working into how a leadership team is operating. Those obviously then cascade down to the teams, because obviously they're reviewing and doing retrospectives against these behaviors and principles as well. And what's really nice is that over a few months, you can genuinely see, and obviously the leadership team gets to see the scores as they go along, but it's positively reinforcing. As they see the scores going up, they start getting more confident of trying and experimenting with new and different approaches in order to kind of strengthen their approach to agility. Okay, so I guess that's kind of like where we're on it to pause. That's kind of our overall approach of kind of how genuinely we've embedded agile ways of working within kind of senior leadership teams. As I said, that does create the right and safe environment for the broader organization to operate in. And I guess, as I said, I don't want to commit sacrilege here, but in spirit of kind of the manifesto, it's really taking the essence of the manifesto, but by stealth making the leaders build their own and own that, which means that they're much more likely to kind of really follow and role model those principles as well. Okay, so I'll pause. Hopefully, that's interesting kind of content there. It'd be good to get your questions or have a discussion. What have your experiences been in applying something like this before?
Thank you, Vikram. We've had a few questions come in the chat already, so if I can put them to you, that would be great. So the first one we had was from Paul. Thank you, Paul. He asked, how do you view comparative agility as an assessment tool?
I'm going to put my hands up and say I don't know what that means. What do you mean by comparative agility, Paul?
So sorry, let me turn on my video too. There is a great set of tools on the site, comparative agility. There's tools for comparative Kanban. Anyway, a whole set of questions. One of the professors at University of North Carolina, I think, was part of creating it. Mike Cohn was involved. So yeah, it's out there in case anyone's interested. I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay, and in connection with what we've discussed.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if they're at the point where they do organizational assessments as well, but there are definitely team assessments, and you can compare yourself against other teams against kind of an international view of how agile teams are doing. Yeah,
that's good. And I think that's a really good thing to do, and I guess like all good benchmarks. Our experience, and I said where we would advise clients to start is by improving on yourself. Obviously you can be inspired by the external organizations and things like that, but I think it's, I guess modern coaching focus is just be better at being your best self as opposed to trying to be someone else, if you know what I mean. And that's why
you need to start where you are, and you need to understand what the gaps are.
Precisely. And I think that, again, goes back to every single organization's difference. And we've almost stopped doing benchmarks as an organization, and kind of turning up and saying, right, this is what good looks like, this is where you need to be. We're very much focused on, well, here's your strengths, here's your areas of opportunity. What can you do better in order to deliver value faster, more efficiently, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for the link as well.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. If you would be able to pop that in the chat, that link, that would be really helpful for a lot of us. So thank you very much, and thank you for your question. The next one I have for you, Vikram, is from Matthew. So thank you, Matthew. It's, what advice would you have for a small or medium growing charity? You talk in billions and have examples of large companies, but how can a smaller charity access consultancy or support without lots of money, or at least make a start on the journey?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Matthew. And so obviously I'm just throwing some brands out there, but we do, we personally, we work with a number of charities, including like MenCap, which is in the thousands of people, but also we work with charities of literally last year, since the COVID started, I think we've supported something like 100 different charities, from two people all the way up to in the thousands. So I think there's plenty of scope to do that. And then I think there's, don't be afraid to ask various different corporates to come and help. There's plenty of organizations which are willing to share their experiences with you, and kind of help you on your journey. We've just been working with a couple of charities where they've partnered up with a bank, and it's part of their kind of societal investment anyway to do that. So don't be afraid to go and find some partners. And if you want, please drop me a note after the session. I'm very happy to try and introduce you to a few organizations if that works. I think that what we've found in working with charities in the third sector is that, ironically, because of the stronger purpose that the organization has, it's almost easier. I'm going to probably dangerous to say that, but in some cases it's easier to embed these new ways of working, because, and again, based on experience, we've seen that the people in those organizations are a lot more open, and they almost want to change because of the purpose and their passion for the particular outcome they're going for. Where sometimes it must be just a salary thing. Maybe and maybe it's just a lack of purpose. Some people just don't want to change. They just want to get their salary. If they're working, I'm just going to pick on a bank. If they're working for a large bank, it's not their most important thing in their whole lives. Where, we've just finished an interesting piece of work with MenCap, and literally they couldn't have enough of what we were doing, and it was just so easy to help them because there was so much demand there. So I'm not sure if that helps, but I think I wouldn't do anything fundamentally different in terms of introducing and embedding an agile way of working with a charity. I think that I always assume, and I say to my teams, it's going to be easier in some respects because the pull is there, because of the passion. I think then it's just obviously because of the limited budgets, it's creating a network of companies and organizations who can help you on your journey, and there's plenty of them who are happy to do that.
Thank you, Vikram. We've had a few more questions come through as well, which is brilliant. So we do have time to go through them. So the next one is from Todd. Thank you, Todd. He said, these behaviour focus points are excellent and great ways to track progress and identify improvements. But I was wondering how this fits with the traditional enablers to agility, e.g., it's all very well dreaming big and wanting to action before perfection, but you need the right skills and capabilities in order to deliver on these things. Yeah,
I completely agree. And I guess what I'm saying here is that I'm not discounting the basic elements of training and upskilling the teams, for sure. And as you saw in one of the slides there, I did say, we do go and do some basic training as well. So it is important. I think that's the easy stuff in terms of training people. The harder stuff is, if you want to really sustain an agile way of working, you've got to change the behaviors and the mindsets of those individuals. And from our experience, it does depend a lot on creating that safe environment, which comes down to leadership teams.
Thank you, Vikram. We've had one more from Jade. Thank you, Jade. She said, do you come across similar barriers to cultural change across different organizations? Is there a pain point which sticks out across different industries that you've been?
Yeah, for sure. It's a good one. I think it'd be interesting to get everyone else's view on the chat as well. But I guess one of the most common ones is, and we've just, we're working with a builder at the moment, a building company, and that, we've just run a similar session this morning actually with them, and you can compare them with the retailer. The common thing which comes across all organizations is prioritization. Most organizations just trying to simply do too much, and all trying to do too much all at the same time, having a huge amount of WIP. So that's definitely a common theme. I think the other one is around, I guess, empowerment as well, as a lot of organizations which are struggling with empowering their teams, and also with the teams struggling to be empowered, because it's a two-way street as well. So those are probably the two common ones in there as well. And then probably, actually, the other one, it was just linked to prioritization, is just dedicating time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It would be much like Vikram said, actually, it'd be great to see some suggestions in the chat if any of you guys have come across particular pain points with this. So next question is from Shannon. Thank you, Shannon. Shannon's asked, are the behaviours done on a survey tool or using an open discussion?
Yeah, so the definition of these behaviours, what we typically do is that we run, as I said, so we try and get the organisation or the individuals to go and visit another organisation. We run and as quickly as possible, we also then run the simulation, and we run kind of an educational session. We try and run all of that in one day, okay? So that's kind of almost treat that as in the morning. Then in the afternoon, after all of that input, we then run a retrospective. And all we simply do is we look at, we give them some hints and think about people, process, tools, technology. And we ask them a simple question, which is that what are the things which we need to keep doing, which will enable us to deliver value as quickly and as efficiently as possible? What should we stop doing, and what should we do more of? So it's almost like a mini retrospective, and it's all done nowadays. We're used to using Mural to do that, so it's very unstructured. We get them to almost put everything down onto a Mural board. We group them up into themes. Through those themes, we prioritize them and say, okay, what are the most important or impactful themes that we should be focusing on? And off the back of that, we then start defining the behaviours which are going to enable that. So it usually can be done quite quickly.
Great, thank you, Vikram. Next one we have is from Meryl. Thank you, Meryl. They've asked, love the example of the Exco assessment of principles and behaviours that you've shared with us. Do you have experience with organisations which are in a lower Exco alignment starting position, and how did you help these clients, if so?
So sorry, say that again. So what happens if we have a client with really not
lower alignment starting position? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
so it's basically a company that where the leadership actually feels quite aligned, but the people in the organization say the opposite.
So I think if you have that type of challenge, I would say give you an example of what we've done with a couple of organizations is, rather than it just being pure leadership defining the principles and behaviors, we would try and pick a cross section. We usually ask the leadership team, go and find some change agents who are going to be involved in the initial pilots and the initial kind of first wave of implementation, get them involved with the leaders, and then define that together. Yeah, so I think that's the best way, because at least we've just done it with this, the builder I was talking to you about this morning, is that what we had is that we almost had a colour, different colours for different team levels, and we could see where like one theme was all about empowerment. The leadership team hardly put anything on that as the theme, where there was a lot of, the delivery teams were talking about that a lot. So we actually had that discussion as well. And that was a really nice way of getting that alignment around, well, you don't see that as a problem, the teams do. And then the other thing which was interesting, which came up, was being customer centric. The delivery teams were really recognizing, after we did a visit to another organization, how they recognized that they were not using customer data to drive decision making. But the leaders, when we said, look, this the big theme coming out here is about customer centricity, the leadership team were like, well, of course we're customer centric. I think it's a complete waste of time to focus on the customer as a principle, because it's just of course we always do that. it's in our value. But, you know, it's nice to kind of show that comparison. And so running it as a vertical in terms of getting a cross section of teams are important, I think.
Thanks.
Thank you, Meryl. It's a really good question. I've got another one here for you, Vikram. I hope you haven't been tired out yet. We've got a few more. So next one is, what do you think of tools or models such as the Barrett model to assess culture?
I would say whoever asked that question, tell us about the Barrett model, because I don't.
Yeah, it's Cause Dominic. Have I got that name correct? I apologise if I haven't. But feel free to unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Oh, please tell us about the Barrett model if you wouldn't mind, and Vikram might be able to help out.
It feels like I'm really ignorant now. Two things people have said, I haven't got a clue.
I put the link in the chat.
Thank you.
That would be great.
So tell us about it, Cause, and
it looks about value, behavior, and culture. It's based, at least in part, on the Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs at first.
Okay.
And I've seen a couple of people using it to assess culture.
Right.
And after that, to see what needs to be evolved depending on your goals, of course. Yeah.
And I think those are all good input. I think it's all great inputs. You know, we worked with HR teams before, where obviously a lot of organizations invested quite a lot of money into their existing values and behaviors. So why do they need a new set of values and behaviors as well? But we use those all as inputs into developing something which is going to help this particular organization turbocharge itself out of the current states.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cause, and amazing background I can see you've got there. That's amazing. Thank you very much for your question, and great to hear so many different things being brought forward that we can then kind of look into afterwards. It's brilliant. So next question we have is from Scott. Thank you, Scott. So the question is, how do you facilitate co-design of leadership principles if they have no prior knowledge of Agile principles? That's a great question.
Yeah, and so as I said, Scott, and thanks for the question, is that we don't do this ignorant of. You know, it'd be hugely dangerous to do that. So just to remind you, so we do take them to go and see other organisations so they can speak to their peers. We do some formal education as well, where we do introduce the basics. We do cover off the manifesto. I guess so. We definitely cover all those things off as well. But what we do is that we make sure it's balanced. So it's not just hitting them with the manifesto book and saying this is the answer. It's making sure that whatever they've been introduced to is in context of their particular challenge as well. Okay, so it's super important to do all of those things. And as I said, ideally we try and pack all of that in one day, so it's all in their minds as they've gone through all that thinking. What we don't do is then, as soon as we finish the session, then go, right, that's exactly what it is, because we do give them some time to go off and test it and validate it with other members of the organization. So when it comes back, it's robust as possible, and it's not incorrect. And clearly we're there to say, well, you can't have 10-week sprints in the principle, you know what I mean? So.
Thank you, Vikram, and thank you, Scott, for your question. That's great. So I can see one more we've got from Jade. So she's asked, in the current climate, how would you approach getting buy-in or convincing the right people in your company to prioritise culture?
To prioritise culture. That is and I wonder what's the difference between this climate and a normal climate. I guess, is that just because everyone's too focused on the short term? I think so. We obviously, because of the research that, as I introduced the session with you guys today, is that we do a lot of that initial focus, just highlighting that success or failure of an agile transformation is definitely predominantly focused on the softer elements as opposed to the harder. So we do a little bit of attempted convincing of that. And then the second thing is, again, going back to this retrospective that we've done, or we do once they've done the visits and they've done the experience with the Lego or the simulations, etc., is we do ask them simply, you know, what's stopping you from, you know, delivering things fast and efficient as possible across a broad range of things. And so they bring it up themselves, you know, and obviously when they, let's just say the client that we worked with this morning says, you know, one of the challenges is that, you know, the teams are being constrained because I'm the bottleneck. That's what one of the leaders said, is everyone's coming to me for the answers. And so that's what's slowing us down. And then we say, well, why is that? Oh, well, it's because that, you know, I'm not providing enough clarity, you know, so we you know, do the 5 whys. I'm not providing enough clarity. The teams don't have enough confidence, or they're not upskilled to make decisions on their own, or basically the way that our organization is structured is, and so on and so forth, is not allowing for effective and I guess empowered decision making, etc. So we, through all of that, you get that discovery that a lot of it can come down to behaviors rather than any other elements as well. So it shouldn't be too much of a hard sell through that discovery step.
Thank you, Vikram. I noticed we've just had a comment from Shannon. I think just some clarification. And Sharon, do unmute yourself and correct me if I'm wrong. So Shannon said, thank you. Sorry, she meant, are the monthly numbers collected ongoing? And I think this is in relation to Shannon's previous question about the behaviours done on a survey tool or using open discussion.
To be honest, it should be, you know, we've got clients now which have been doing this for a few years, and obviously at that point they've now started to even refine and update their behaviours and values as well, their principles. So yes, it should be done constantly, like anything. I mean, if you're trying to get fitter, it's kind of like trying to get fitter and faster at running without having a stopwatch. It'd be kind of silly. So yeah, we try and encourage leadership teams to just bake this in as part of their PI planning, as part of their 30-day reviews and retrospectives. So I think that's super important.
And I've just seen a thumbs up from Shannon. I was just going to say, does that clarify? That's brilliant. Perfect timing. And that looks like that's the end of our questions. But other than that, I've just seen some great feedback in terms of really brilliant to hear kind of some open vulnerability, some real kind of clear examples. Yeah. And Shannon again has said, thank you for sharing your processes and experiences. Agree that empowerment and prioritization are 2 of the biggest challenges. So if no one has any more questions or any kind of closing points from you, Vikram?
No, otherwise, you know, thanks so much again for taking the time to listen in. I hope that's been valuable. I know it's kind of celebrating the manifesto, but I guess it's making the manifesto, you know, really apply to the organisations. So that's kind of, I guess that's the kind of takeaway for us. Absolutely, and thank you so much to everyone that joined this afternoon, no matter where you are in the world and your time zone. Just thank you so much, and thank you, Vikram, for your time. It's been really insightful, really helpful to listen to you speak today. Just to let you guys know that you can stay in touch with us at the Agile Business Consortium at agilebusiness.org. And you can kind of keep in touch with all of our latest Agile news. And we have a conference coming up in October, and we're looking for speakers, so you can apply to speak or just be a part of it and come along to some of our sessions that we'll be doing later in the year. I think my colleague Jade is just going to pop a link into the chat shortly, which is just a feedback link. So give us some feedback on your thoughts on the presentation today, and we can work to improve and include your feedback into the rest of the sessions that we'll be doing for the festival. There it is. Jade, and I'll nominate myself. I'm going to do a session on comparative agility and the Barrett model. And the Barrett model, exactly. Those are the 2 things I'm going to.
We've all got some homework to do. But thank you so much, guys, for your feedback and and mentioning new models and all sorts. It's been really interesting. So thank you so much for your time. I'll leave you all to the rest of your day, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. So thank you so much.